Thanks, and good morning, everybody. Uh, Before talking about peace, I would like to talk about violence first, just to give you an idea of how badly we need peace today. So this chart here is the result of years of hard work by Professor Rommel, and he has calculated all the death tolls from 1900 to 1988. And this chart here is a little bit complicated, so I have simplified it for you here in this slide. So basically from 1900 to 1988, more than 38 million military personnel died, and 161 million unarmed women, children, and men died. So the number will add up to more than 203 million deaths from 1900 to 1988. The bad news is that these are the minimum estimates. These numbers can be as high as 360 million people who died through violence between 1900 and 1988. So these numbers are heartbreaking, but let's look at the bright side. At the end of the day, that's the reason that we are all here. So according to Professor Steven Pinker, who is a professor at Harvard University, he has studied violence throughout the history, and he has this conclusion that I will quote here. He believes that violence has been in decline over the long stretch of history, and today we are probably living in the most peaceful moments of our species' time on Earth. Now, given these conflicts in the Middle East that claim the lives of tens of innocent civilians every day, if not every minute, this claim or this conclusion might be funny, but Mr. Pinker makes this argument based on two facts. The first one is that these numbers, the death toll, they are relevant numbers, meaning that the percentage of human beings who die today, the percentage of the total human population, is very less than the percentage of the total human beings who used to die before the pre-modern history. And the reason for this is the second perspective, which he believes that we as human beings, we have gotten kinder and gentler. He backs up this argument by an example. He says that in the 16th century Paris, there was a popular form of entertainment was a cat burning. Kings and queens would participate in these events in which a cat would be hanged by a rope and would be slowly lowered inside fire. And they would laugh at the cat while the cat was burning alive and then carbonized. Today, we denounce these sadist acts, and that's because we have gotten kinder and gentler. Whether we agree with Mr. Pinker or disagree, this is a totally different discussion, but we have to agree that we as human beings have gotten kinder and gentler. And if we have, then we have to find out what is the pacifying factor. If we find the pacifying factor, we can promote it in order to promote peace as well. For Mr. Pinker, the pacifying factors are international trade, globalization, industrialization, and all these lists that Mr. Pinker mentions. But let's say the source of all these factors is education. Although indirectly, but it is, at the end of the day, is education that led us to this what we have today. And we can also ask, like, how can education directly contribute to peace building? Because these are the indirect forms. To answer this question, I would like to talk about an Ottoman Kurdish Muslim scholar. His name is Badi'uzzaman Said Nursi, who's also known as a reformist of the 20th century in the Muslim world. He believes that there are three enemies of humankind, which are illiteracy and poverty and disunity. These three diseases, they are intertwined and each leads to the other within a cycle, but the starting point is illiteracy. An illiterate person is less likely to be able to find a job. At the end of the day, unemployed people are more likely to be poor, and poor people are more likely to resort to violent means in order to survive. We are human beings, and we are all about survival. We hurt, we kill in order to survive. And this violence then later can be systematic and then organized and then can lead to the social conflict within different groups of people within a society. So the antidote to these three diseases, by the same token, is education, economic welfare, and unity. It all starts with education. An educated person is more likely to be able to find a job and then financially do well, and is less likely to join join a radical group or a military armed group in order to provide income for him or herself. And at the same time, an educated person is less likely to be brainwashed. Now, I would like to give you an example of where I come from. It's a bitter story, but a relative of ours was married to a young woman, and they were living a happy life. The husband was an uneducated, illiterate, and unemployed person. One day, the wife went back home and participated in her brother's wedding and took some photos. And later, these photos came back home. The husband saw the photos, and he had heard from the local imam that taking pictures is taboo in Islam and it's a crime. So he consulted with the imam and said, like, my wife has taken some photos. What should I do? This happened in the next village of where I come from. He said that you should kill her because she took some photos. So without hesitation, he went back home. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen, beheaded the wife over one photo. He was uneducated, illiterate. He was easily brainwashed by one local imam. And later, this whole incident turned into a local conflict between the two tribal families. But that's how most of the conflicts start. And another way that education leads to peace building is that, according to the democratic peace theory, this is a whole different discussion, that education leads to peace and democratic nations are less likely to go to war with each other. And the last way that education leads to peace is that education leads to unity. According to Professor Ernest Gellner, he believes that the modern nationalism is the outcome of education. Because state provides education, education requires a unified language requires, creates a unified nation assimilates the minorities, and at the end of the day, during the assimilation, conflict happens. Therefore, education does not always lead to peace. Sometimes education can lead to conflict as well. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves what kind of education we need. Taliban had education. This imam, the local imam, was educated. Therefore, Badiou Azzaman says that we need to educate people, both science and morality, moral principles. Whether these moral principles come from basic universal human values or components of different religions, that does not matter. What matters is that we have to educate people, both science, and we should not ignore morality. Because science alone, it might, I'm not saying that all the time, can lead to creating or inventing more destructive weapons every day. WMD, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons are all the result of science as well. Therefore, we should educate ourselves, Badiou Azzaman argues, and other people, science and morality. Are these ideas practicable? Are they doable in the real world? The answer is yes. So there are people out there who have turned these ideas of Badiou Azzaman into reality. Where I come from in Iraqi Kurdistan, there's a civil society movement called Hizmet Movement, led by the Turkish scholar Fethullah Gulen. They have tried to promote peace through education in this troubled, small region of the world. They have tens of schools and tens of thousands of students. So what they do is they try to build peace through the means that they have at their hand. One of them is the school environment. They have students from different religious and ethnic backgrounds. They all go to the same class. They participate in the same school and after-school activities. They go to picnic. They participate in reading camps. And according to social science, conducting an act, even if it's a crime, creates a bond among the participants. So this creates a bond among all these students who come from different backgrounds, and hopefully one day, these are the future leaders. They will do politics based on common human values rather than sectarian or ethnic or religious identities. They also try to build peace through their dormitories. I have witnessed that myself, students coming from totally different backgrounds, they sleep in the same room, they eat together, they live together. At the end of the day, they don't have any options but to live together and learn how to live peacefully. And another way that they try to promote peace is through the social activities. So they do not limit their activities to the students alone, but to the parents of the students. For example, for the parents, they have football tournaments, or they organize some charity activities. They distribute meat and aid over poor people in special occasions, especially in Eid al-Adha and other special occasions. Now, for the mothers, they come together, they cook together, and they sell food for charity purposes. So this creates a bond between parents who are Turkmens, Kurds, Arabs, Shias, Sunnis, and they all come from the same place, but unfortunately, they have had a bitter past, and until today, many of them see each other as enemies. I would like to conclude by focusing on what the international community or the United Nations can do in order to promote peace through education. I think it's time for the international community to intervene in the education of maybe at least some certain countries. I'm not arguing that United Nations or the international community should decide how human beings think, but at least they should decide what some countries cannot teach. Because there are some countries who have education system that teach the students it's okay to kill somebody else just because they have a different faith or a different ethnic identity. So we already intervene in the sovereignty of other countries in the name of R2P and humanitarian intervention, etc. So, but we are so much occupied by the conventions that concern WMDs, international arms trade, and all these, like who gets what kind of weapons. We are less concerned about what human beings learn in the future. So we all know that a sword does not kill. It's in the hands of a killer. So we need to be less concerned about the swords and should be more occupied by what human beings learn and how, even if you give them a sword, they would not use it in the future. I would be happy to answer some questions at the end. And thank you again for having me.